Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of the Leadership Void podcast. I'm Enrique with my co host, Vince, to bring you the best in our veteran, military spouse, and first responder community. And Vince will introduce today's guest.
Absolutely. I'll start off with, are you ready?
Oh,
Because we
boy.
have with us Heather Hathaway Miranda. She's the owner and founder of Hathaway Miranda LLC from the greater Chicago area. Welcome, Heather, to the show. First, let's start off, kick off, tell us a little bit about you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Buenos dias to everyone, or buenas tardes, what part of the world you might be in. Let's see, a little bit about me. I am now bilingual. I was not raised with Spanish, but I am fluent. I am bicultural. I have, my parents are gone, but my mother was first generation Mexican American, and my father, born and raised in Chicago, is Danish Czech. So I have these two lenses of the world. First generation college degree recipient. I'm a survivor of domestic violence. I was a former caregiver to my mother with cancer. I'm an educator, researcher in these years of living adulthood. But now I am a speaker, transformational speaker, and a racial healing practitioner, a consultant on all things about equity, diversity, inclusion, and social justice. And I do some coaching. I am a proud mom to a voracious reader and now a military spouse.
Well, that's amazing. What is there left on the list that Heather has not done? Was is the right question.
Your job.
But yeah, wow. It's amazing to see the background. So great to see you. You mentioned surviving. You are not a survivor, you are a thriver because I know you and I know what you speak and say, and you are definitely thriving. Thank you for being with us today. Tell us a little bit about your company.
Absolutely. Thank you. So as I mentioned, being an educator, part of that is speaking and being able to pivot. And I started realizing doing that work, people in my network were connecting with me. Also being a scholar, I was going to academic conferences. And so there's good presenters and there's not so good presenters, even if the material is great information. So I started studying that, but people started inviting me or catching me doing presentations and going, you're pretty dynamic. Can you talk about this? So I started getting into volunteering at conferences. There's a Latina women's conference at Michigan State called Dia de la Mujer. And I would volunteer there. Then I was asked to be the MC. I was asked to come to Michigan State for a keynote, I believe it was in 2015, for a women's conference. And that really was the start of what I do in the speaking realm and presenting formally. I established my LLC 2.5 years ago as a business, but I've been doing this work for over 2.5 decades of diversity, advising, and sharing. Now, I have about 9 years being a survivor of domestic violence and thriving, but in my healing for over 6 years, I have publicly gone to spaces and supporting the agency. So my work in bringing that through my business has been there, but I have been asked to consult on diversity. And this pivot of losing my mother 4.5 years ago and meeting a military spouse changed the trajectory of what I thought I was going to be a professor forever. But this has been an intersection for me to now really dedicate into growing the business and being able to serve the needs of folks who need to have conversations, help them have comfortable conversations or feel more comfortable having uncomfortable topics being discussed. So that's where it's come to grow into now doing this work more full time.
Well, that's amazing. And you being an educator, having a voracious little young man or woman in your family doing great things, shows the testament of truly who you are as an individual. So you talk about pivoting, and there's a lot of things that happened during the pandemic. Just curious, all the work you do, how was it influenced or impacted during that time?
I had a keynote speech scheduled that first fall, or was it? No, I think it was a spring semester leadership conference at a university for students, college students. And it was a month or two later. Obviously, nobody was getting together. So I was not going to be standing in front of anybody. The conference was canceled. So there was that loss of in person. But I was trained 2-3 months later to be a racial healing practitioner. Everything was virtual. I'm able to hold sacred racial healing circles virtually. I've become much better at what Zoom is. I was familiar with it for meetings. And I am been blessed to have clients nationwide and even international presentations. I have been invited to the University of Guanajuato in central Mexico to do the work that I do virtually. So I have now returned in the past year to some in-person things, a few things that I did mid-pandemic to go in person, outdoors, social distancing, where I could still be a speaker or presenter, but greatly I thrived. People are still committed. And what we saw with the pandemic and the intersection of realizing folks of color know that there's been a problem with racism and issues of classism and inequity in this country, but the pandemic pushed the disparities, the conversation to say, and what happened with Breonna Taylor and George Floyd, and people wanted to talk, they were isolated yet wanted to connect with humanity. So I, through my work, have been able to hold those spaces virtually and hopefully provide a lot of respect and dignity for people to connect through the pandemic. So my business thrived. I had to kind of look at my client list, and it was referral, and people seeing, Heather, you're doing this. Can you help us have this conversation? And it's great because there are a lot of companies that have employees, like AARP, for example. Their employees are nationwide, or American Medical Association. Sometimes they want to connect with their leaders at a certain level that are across different states. So I've been blessed, and I don't take it for granted at all that during the pandemic, for the most part, it's been wonderful.
Yeah, it's amazing how that period has varied for so many different people. You know, there were great losses, and we want to
Yes.
acknowledge those, but at the same time, there were great advances because of the need to connect. And, you know, when we thought we were disconnected as it was with cell phones and computers and all that, and there was a breakdown, but then there was a realization that, hey, human to human is where most of the work is done. Let's get this back on. So I'm happy to hear that you thrived during that period. So now you're on the go. You're doing these speaking engagements. You're doing these trainings, which is all wonderful. So what's on the horizon for your company?
What's on the horizon? What I hope is some continued inclusion of coaching. I did some executive coaching with executive directors of non-for-profits in Chicago. So have a couple of more leads to do that, to support, but executive directors of color. These are folks who are BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, Latino individuals. And a lot of us get into positions that are folks of color, we're the first. And what is that kind? And then there's familiar and cultural layers too, because I always look at the intersections of our identity. So if it's gender, along with understanding culture. So I hope to continue to offer coaching, and as well as working on writing some books. So some children's books. I have a master's degree in child development. There is a lot, as I've taught in the classroom at the university level, Latino studies and education courses are offerings of children's toys and books are greatly still lacking in the diversity of offerings. So I hope to be able to publish some stories that are culturally relevant and where children, diverse children, marginalized children can see themselves. And as well as continue to grow the offerings that I can, reach more universities, reach more companies that do want to have the conversation for themselves, really not just have a Black Lives Matter statement, but really live and walk and breathe the work, the anti-racism work, the work of inclusion, the work of wanting a different world. What I say I do is planting seeds for change. Hopefully that's positive change, but companies companies that want to be able to say, Heather, or leaders that say, Heather, I need help having this conversation. Can you come in and do some team building? I'm blessed to work with Revolución Latina, Ballet Hispánico in New York City. And these are Latinx organizations that know the diversity of who they serve, but want to have these continued conversations and be supported, because even the idea within the Hispanic community or Latino community, we have so much diversity. I'm Mexican American is not the same as a Cuban American or Puerto Rican, but we can come together. So in the horizon of what I hope to do is to continue to do that, offer more keynote speaking, for Women's History Month, Hispanic History Month. Every day, every month should hopefully include those conversations around diversity.
Well, the world is blessed to have you, being a great vessel to serve by liberating greatness, I will say, Heather. So, and that color represents, warmth, fire, and light. So continue doing the great work you're doing. I look forward to hearing more about great things in your company and your books coming forward. Let's transition a little bit, talk about leadership, and you yourself as an educator and doing some great things. What do you do in your spare time that aids you to thrive in your professional life?
Absolutely. I would say it's probably two things, and they might overlap. One is getting outdoors, being grounded, as I say, with Mother Earth, or whatever your, kind of faith or perspective. I love to get out in my garden. I love to get to national parks. I've been to over 25, I think it is. I lost count. And in that is travel. I love to travel. And when I travel, I get more perspective about who I am, what are my practices, what are my traits, what are my rituals, and learning from those who I might interact with on those trips. I've been to over 35 countries, and doing that, I've been to all 50 United States. So keep looking at who are we as quote unquote Americans, and who am I as an individual. So when I bring that home, or wherever home is that I stand my 2 feet on this earth, I can have a better understanding of what I feel my values are, how I see humanity, because what I'm doing is to try to help eliminate these isms and having folks connect. So if the work I'm doing, I need to go out there and get to know people, get to see how their lives are, see what do we have in common, what are our differences that I can still respect and understand and interweave into the work that I do. But Mother Earth, oh my goodness, just to have that peace with meditation, mindfulness in my walking, that helps me be more balanced, because the work I do is tough. There's this phrase, oh gosh, there's a term, just the exhaustion that happens sometimes for women, especially folks of color, that we carry a burden of the trauma of our community, or of generations. And so it's very important for me to have that wellness, to connect with Mother Earth, or just nature.
Well, wellness is definitely something that we encourage for all folks that are leading
Yes.
charges, right? Because you can get burnt out and often feel by yourself alone, even though you may not be, right? And so wellness is one of those great things to encourage. Now, throughout your lifetime and all the many variety of things that you've been able to do, undoubtedly you've learned some things that you would probably be able to pass on to a new leader, a person coming up. So what would those things be?
Excellent question. Um, my father was, he was a gentleman who served 3 years, I believe it was, uh, in the Army. And he went through a journey in his life that when I was 10 years old, he became a recovered alcoholic. And he served for 13 years, recovering addicts. And the phrase he taught me is something that just carries through my life is, Heather, he said, you cannot change anyone but yourself. So those of us who may be in positions of power and leadership, we really need to look at ourselves. We need to look in the mirror sometimes and go, wait a minute, I'm leading. I can be a positive influence. I can try to inspire. I can guide. But at the end of the day, we cannot change anybody else but ourselves. And going, how can I do this better? What do I learn from this? How do I improve this program? How do I improve my speech? So that is the number one. But if you want a book that I love, and those are the pillars of happiness, it's The Four Agreements by Don Miguel Ruiz, based on Toltec wisdom from Mexico. I just love that impeccability of word. Don't make assumptions. It just don't take things personally. That is also from for if you like to read, that's my advice about great leadership.
Definitely, you have a great individual. Your dad, may bless his heart, gave you some great foundation. Always look in the mirror, because it starts with self, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then you can follow up by doing some great literature reading, because a reading is a silent educator, as we call it. So
Mm-hmm.
great advice to share with our audience. Now, Heather, how do you handle when you come through those obstacles, those challenges? How do you handle them? When you face them, what do you do?
Oh my goodness. I often will think of the ancestors. I think of those who have gone on before us. I, sometimes I'm thinking my father died many years ago. But I even think of those ancestors I didn't even meet. I love to read history, Vince. You mentioned books. I love to try to understand, but I also like to think, what about the voices that didn't get recorded in a book, and who wrote down this history? So to kind of feel that that energy of who was here, who walked this land. But I do think I miscarried a child before my now 9-year-old son. I think of those of us who have loss of a loved one, but a child. I also think of my former students, students who have, I might hear from, that have thrived. So there's things that get me through tough times. But I think of, what am I going to do? Working on things like racism, I don't think I'll see the end of it in my lifetime, but I'm still inspired by the need, by the drive. I know what it felt like to be marginalized. So what gets me through that is maybe thinking of somebody who was kind to me. I use humor a lot. I think a lot of us, when we get through tough times, in my family, that was something we did, was to have laughter even about dark times. My father's and my mother's funerals, we still told stories, and we had joy, because every day is really this gift. That's why they call it the present. I always thought that was so cute and corny. But thinking of confronting conflict. Now, let me tell you, when I survived domestic violence, that last night that my husband at the time had acted very inappropriately, threatening my life and to take my child, I tried to ground myself. I just used breath. I just went deep to the ancestor connection to say, I'm going to get through this. I'm going to get through this. You're meant to be here. And digging into that gut purpose to say, I'm going to get through this tough time of challenge, and I will come forth.
That's a very powerful perspective, especially being in a situation like that. So, congratulations to you for grounding yourself in that strength. And we're so happy that you are here with
Yes.
us today. And I
Yes.
tell you, that there's so many challenges that we can overcome it with a different perspective. But I'm glad that you shared that. Now, with challenges, there's also times of change,
Mhm.
and undoubtedly, you're going to see some of those changes come through with your business and with life. So, how do you strategize around those periods?
Strategize. I talk to folks younger than me. Let's be honest. I love the idea I was introduced to. How many mentors do you have that are younger than you? And as I have aged, that's why I think, being in education has served me well. I have some young folks that I mentor them, but they also mentor me. So strategizing diversity gets misused. And there's even, critique about me saying I do DEI, is it EDI, is it DIJ, all these things. but having a diverse team of folks around you, and that means age, that means discipline that they might be exposed to. That's how I strategize is and I invite critical feedback. I honestly, I love myself. I'm confident what you're saying. If you care about me, and I trust you care about me, you're going to give me some feedback and a lens that I have to be confident enough to listen to your perspective. So those are the ways I strategize about challenges, who I am, what am I doing? The young folks are brutally honest, and I mean all the way down to the preschoolers that work in a preschool, and my high schoolers and college students. They'll be like, "Senorita," I worked on the west side and south side of Chicago with 2 different schools, African American male schools, and I love those former students. They were brutally honest, candid, and hilarious, and I had to take it to heart sometimes.
Amen on that, because, truth to be told, we all need the truth, and we all need to speak the truth. And you're right, our youth does speak their mind, and having a young mentor, that's a great idea and a great strategy, as you mentioned. So we appreciate that, and having all the different lenses, the diversity of thought at the table of different perspectives does encourage change and strategize for that. So appreciate that. Those listening in are so eager to know how to contact you, Heather. So, or Hathaway Miranda LLC. So how do they go about doing so?
Fantastic. On most social media, if you do the arroba Hathaway Miranda on Instagram, I'm on LinkedIn, Heather Hathaway Miranda, and my website, it's easy. My name, it's www.heatherhathawaymiranda.com. So you can find me. You Google my 2 last names with my first name, and you'll find me on social media easily.
Well, wonderful, folks. We're going to have that as part of the show notes and the video so that you can get a hold of Heather. Heather, it's been such a wonderful time speaking with you. Your passion exudes, right? It comes out. Wonderful backdrop to reflect that on your part. And we really enjoyed having you here. Folks, if you want to get a hold of the Leadership Void podcast, the leadership void at gmail.com is where you'll send any correspondence. If you want a specific speaker for us to consider on the show, or a topic covered concerning leadership, please let us know by that means. And once again, thank you, Heather.
No, thank you both so much. And everybody hit that subscribe button there for Leadership Void.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, we really, really do need that. Thank you so much. And we're grateful for our sponsor. Home Team Mortgage is actually graciously sponsoring our shows. And we do something else as well. First and the 15th, we have something called the Radio Check. Radio Check is an opportunity to get a hold of our first responder, military community, get together, have sacred time to really commute and talk and intersect each other's thoughts, and just, lift each other up. So first and the 15th, 1900 hours, LinkedIn Live, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We'll be there on Radio Check. But today is all about our wonderful guest, Heather. Thank you so much for being here, and have a great day.
You too, folks. Thank you.